or on an honor flight with,
Yes.
and my son says, "I'm going to buy you this hat." And I said, "Doug, I've got a dozen hats like that." He said, "No, you don't." Anyway, I said, "Yeah, I do." And anyway, he purchased it, put it in a sack, and we got back to Manhattan. He said, "Now, I bought you that hat, and I want you to wear it, so I'm wearing it."
Oh, that's wonderful. We've been a part of honor flights as well.
Yeah,
So those are
I've been a
wonderful
couple
hats.
of them. Well, he and his wife took me back there right after it was built, and then I did go on an honor flight later.
Okay, very good. Well, you deserve to see it for
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
So. All right, so how this is going, I'm just going to ask you a few questions, and then you can just tell me about your experience. If you kind of get to a point where you don't know what else to talk about, I'll prompt another question. But other than that, we'll just kind of have a conversation like we're sitting here at a coffee shop. All right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, why don't you start off with your full name and what branch of the military you're in?
Horace J. Jim Sharp. I was in the infantry. I entered combat during the Battle of the Bulge and was assigned to Company B, 18th Infantry, 1st Infantry Division.
What were you doing before the war, and how did you get enlisted?
I lived near White City, Kansas on a farm, and when I turned 18, he registered for the draft. So I assumed I'd just go in the draft. Well, I got to the draft board and they said, "Well, we need you producing food instead of serving in the Army," which I didn't like very well because all my buddies were going, kids I'd played basketball with in high school and football. But I said, "Well, okay, I'll guess if my country needs me there better than anything else, I'll do that." So I did. Had an deferment. 3 or 4 months later, my buddies that went in, their parents were starting to get notices of being killed, wounded, or captured. And I thought, here I am here, I need to go. So my dad had a business, and he was also a county commissioner here in Abilene, Dixon County. And he says, "Well, I can't run a business and be on the Abilene Commission Board and farm." So I had 2 brothers, and they were already in the service. So I was the only one left. And so he said, if you want to go, if that's what you want to do, we'll just have to sell out our cows and implement. And that's what they did. So anyway, I went from draft deferred to being drafted, I guess, or whatever you call it.
Tell me about your basic training.
Well, went to Leavenworth. There's about 30 other guys from Morris County, and on the train. Went to Fort Leavenworth, and of course you go through that Army process. About 100 guys lining up, stripped, and going getting physical exam, waiting around for hours. Seems like, but anyway, you eventually get there, and you're signed in, and everybody swears, allegiance to the country. So, well, the last thing we did, one old drill sergeant took us out to pick up some cigarette butts and matchsticks off the parade ground. And I remember that because he sang a refrain that went something like this: "Eyes to the ground, elbows to the sky, bid those babes bye, bye, bye." And of course, I had a girlfriend then. And I thought that was quite an old ring. It made you a lot more homesick than you really were. But you asked, I did. That's not a part of basic training, I guess. But it's the first Army drill sergeant I met that sang to us while we drilled. Anyway, they put us on a troop train, and trains then were coal-fired. It was hot in June, and it headed southeast. And we were traveling a train about 3 days. We'd open the windows up, and especially at night, and that coal-fired stuff would get in, come through the windows. The next morning you'd be full of coal dust, Anyway, we get down in Alabama. I didn't know where it was at the time, but we pulled off to a siding, and there's some little kids playing along the railroad track, and I hollered at them. I said, "Is there an Army base down in here?" And yeah. He said, "Fort McClellan, Alabama." So that's where I took my basic training, 13 basic training. Teach you to shoot a rifle and throw a hand grenade, and use a bayonet, and supply wounded medicine to fellow soldiers, go at night on patrol or daytime or anything. Anyway, killing each other. Good God. Anyway, I didn't know it till I got there, but that's what war is all about. Human beings. Not very intelligent. Anyway, I thought nothing could be worse than the infantry, so I volunteered to paratroops, and two of my buddies did too. Anyway, we were shipped after basic training to Fort Benning, Georgia, the paratroop school. Went there, went through physical again, and I flunked. My two buddies passed. I played football on a Sunday afternoon pickup game. I was kicking off for our team, and I hit the ground with my foot. I didn't have a football shoe on, but I had just a goulash, Anyway, I knew it hurt, but I didn't know why. But anyway, I flunked the physical because of that. So I went home for 10 days and lay in the route and ended up in Boston Harbor, got on a troop train, 4,000 troops, and met up with a convoy out off of Boston Harbor, where we couldn't smoke because Nazis might hear you, or which might be a submarine lying around, So anyway, got out in the harbor, met up with the 40 ships in the convoy, headed for, we didn't know where, Europe. And probably I pulled the stupidest stunt I'd pulled in the Army. When we got out in the ocean, there were submarines lurking around, and our ships knew it, but they didn't know where they were. And we all knew it, but we didn't know where. But anyway, to make a long story short, we were packed in there, 5 bunks high. And everybody, half of us were seasick, laying on our bunks. Anyway, the destroyers started dropping depth charges. And I'd never heard of depth charge before. That's what drops down into the ocean where we think the subs are and explodes. And that was startling to everybody on the boat. And it's kind of funny now, I guess, but I thought I'd calm the troops a little bit. And I said, "Man your lifeboats." Boy, they jumped up, the sick guys jumped out of their bunks and they started running to beat the lifeboats, I guess. And boy, if they'd have found out who was yelling that and causing this panic, I'd have probably got court-martialed. But anyway, I tried to say, I tried to tell them that I was just trying to calm things a little bit anyway. Anyway, I was sick too, and it got everybody out of bed at least. So, but we ended up in Boston, or Le Havre, France, a harbor in Le Havre, France. So I better stop there for.
So tell me about your role in your unit.
My role in the unit was just a plain old soldier, except the first day in combat it changed. But anyway, I was a combat infantryman, rifleman, MOS number I think 101 or something.
Were you involved in any invasions?
No. I was on land all the time I was fighting. D-Day had already happened.
You want to ask about that first day of
Tell me about your first day of battle.
Well, the day before, we stayed in a farm barn, hay, full of hay. Cows, slept there in cold. It was cold. And the sergeant come and said, we're going to the front lines. And this is in the Ardennes forest in Belgium, near Hansfeld. So he said we'll be able to manipulate maybe half a mile on a Jeep, but don't smoke and don't say anything because the German patrols are out. So anyway, we did. We manipulated or transported ourselves on a Jeep about half a mile, but you couldn't see anything, and Jeep couldn't use their lights, so it was really tough. But anyway, once we got partway to the front lines, and we were in the forest, he said, we're going to have to keep in contact with each other. The German patrols are out here, and we'll put our one hand on your shoulder, and then you put your hand on the next, which we did. And we eventually got to the front lines, but they didn't, the only foxhole they had available, and it was too cold to dig a foxhole, and this was midnight. Dark, you couldn't see anything in the Hurtgen because it was a canvas covered with trees. So I said, but there was one, I guess, two of the soldiers that got killed that way, and their foxhole was emptied. So they took Rogers, a guy from Tennessee, who was one of the replacements, and I in that foxhole. Well, about 4 o'clock then in the morning, he come and advised us to be ready to go into combat first thing in the morning, and that we would be riding tanks into battle. So about 4:30 or so, our tanks started revving up their motors, getting ready to go. And of course, the Germans could hear it. A tank motor you can hear forever. The Germans heard us and started throwing artillery in there. But, you want to go back to your foxhole, but you're supposed to be at the tank you're riding on at 5 o'clock, and we're going to attack. Nobody's getting away from that. So we did, and we attacked. They put 6 or 7 of us on a tank. And man, we went in and attack at 5 o'clock, and there was about, I'd say 12 or 13 tanks. It was visible. I mean, you could see, but it was still dawn, So anyway, we got on those tanks, and my God, those tanks were traveling 20 miles an hour because you want to get out of the heat zone or you might get killed. But if you're traveling, you're not as liable to get hit. And that's what those tankers did. They didn't think anything about us guys up on top who were hanging on for dear life, But anyway, we got there. And captured a village just before Hansfeld, Belgium. I don't know what the name of this village was, because you're not looking for villages or anything. You're looking for the enemy. You focus on it. So anyway, we captured that, went outside the town where was a bigger forest area, about maybe a mile, half a mile wide, fighting all the way. And the first thing I always remember about that is it's a country road, but the Germans were in the middle here, and we got them surrounded. And one of them was laying in the road when we were riding up there on a tank. And boy, he's there waving a white flag laying in the middle of the road, just a narrow road, tank ditches on each side, and I'm wondering, damn, is that tanker going to run over that guy? He's wounded. He's some way scared of death. He stayed still there laying in the road waving a white flag. I don't know whether he lived or died, but anyway, I always remember that. And then I'm trying to tell you about the first day, which is, I don't know why I'm here really, because it was pretty. We got this place surrounded, and I was getting off my tank, and I got hit by a German 88. And that tanker crew got blown out of that tank turret. It's like that. And I still had my hand on the tank because I was near a deep ditch. It was full of snow, 18 inches. White snow. Boy, this tanker coming out of there with blood all over him, and it splashed on that snow, and you never forget that. Anyway, the whole tank crew died. Nowhere got into these woods. Somebody shouted, "German tanks coming up the road. Bring the bazookas forward." Well, we did. This tank was followed by a half-track, and they were trying to break out to go to the next town. And they come up through there with about 4 machine guns blazing, 2 on the tank and 4 on the half-track. And there were German soldiers in the back of the half-track, and they had rifles too. And our bazooka team did hit the tank with a bazooka round, and the darn bazooka round didn't even go off. And of course, after that, with those machine guns blazing and the tanks heading to Hansfeld, I don't think we killed more than 1 or 2 of those, and we lost some people because of their machine gun fire. But anyway, it's a long story short.
No, that's good. Yeah.
Anyway, then later that next night, we captured the town of Hansfeld, Belgium. So that's the end of that story. That's the first day in combat. I wouldn't want any more of that.
That was the only time you were in combat?
No, I was in combat the rest of the war.
Okay.
And I lived in that kind of a situation many times. You wonder why.
Where did you go to after Hansville?
Well, we captured Hansfeld, and then we were pulled back. See, this is my first day, and fortunately it was time for the unit to get rest. So we moved back to Commemoration for about 3 days. These guys had been, my buddies that are in there, they'd been in combat for 2 weeks. That's what you combat usually do, 2 weeks, and you go back for rest. And that's what they were ready to do. Fortunately, I hadn't been in that outfit that long. They'd had a lot of casualties. So I went back on rest with them, and then 2 weeks later, we went back and, we went back to Belgium. They hadn't moved the line forward. A lot of competition, a lot of German defense, because we were just about 5 miles from the German border, and they had tank traps and pillboxes, and they really defended they're good soldiers, and they defended their country.
Do you remember when VE Day happened?
Yeah. By then, I went from Belgium. Well, we were also in France earlier, but anyway, not very long. But anyway, across Germany, clear down to Bavaria, near Berchtesgaden, where Hitler's hideout was. And we had captured a village. Well, we got another tank story. We were going to capture this village, and we were on a blacktop road. We were the lead tank, and so they said, we're going to move right up this road and surprise them. And there was a curve it in the road. So we did, and they were moving 35 miles an hour probably. And Germans had camouflaged an anti-tank weapon in the highway, and of course it was camouflaged. We didn't see it, but it hit the tank and blew us off. Everybody was on there, and blew the tank trap or the tracks off the tank, and of course immobilized it. So then we a town by the name of Wilsdorf. We captured it that night. I missed a lot of opposition and losing our platoon leader. And anyway, it was a tough battle, but lived through it. I've been back and visited that town since then, and that was an interesting trip.
Were you close to your platoon leader?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was an Indian, Sergeant Angel. He's the Blackfoot tribe from Washington, up in Washington State. Really good leader, but we captured him. He and a squad went into the town square, and they run into heavy fire, and they just blew him apart. So he died, and 3 or 4 others did too.
And tell me about the end of the war when you heard about the victory.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, we went in and captured this town. I was a squad leader by then, and the civilians that we'd interrogated said that there was a small German army camp outside of town. So I said, well, I'll lead the troop to go up there and see what the situation is, and I did. Well, we got up there, and it was the civilians had started taking over the camp. They were hungry. German didn't have hardly any food or petrol, when we'd blown up all of their cities, and they didn't even have petrol to run cars. Civilians didn't get any petrol or any gas. There wasn't any. The Army had it all. And so anyway, we went up there as 4 of us, 4 squads, 4 people. And we went up there and they carried it. It was just a small garrison with 3 or 4 barracks in a town square, or army square about 4 or 5 times larger than this. But anyway, civilians had come in, and the German troops that were there had pulled out into the forest surrounding it. So we reconnoitered the area, and boy, all at once a machine gun bullet started kicking the dust at your feet. And we decided we'd get the heck out of there. We could put more than 4 troops if we were going to capture the place. So we went back. But anyway, got back in the edge of town. When you set out perimeter, you have tanks every 50 yards and foxholes every 25 yards or so. So anyway, we were going by one of these tanks, and the guy rose up and out of the turret, just out of the clear blue, and he said, "Did you guys know the war was over?" Of course, and the Germans didn't know it either. The troops in the field didn't know it, But they'd got it across the road, or across the radio tank on the tank, that President Truman had declared the war was over. And of course, we were real happy, but we knew the war was sudden over. We about got killed just an hour ago or less. So anyway, but it was really over. We didn't go up there till, word soaked in around that it was really over, and we were elated, Anyway, that's the end of the war.
Good story. What was your journey back home?
Well, I was in a situation where you got points, you accumulated points to get to come home. And I needed about 8 or 10 more points to get to come home. And at the time, my company commander announced to our whole company that they were going to have a trial of these Nazi leaders. And, he was wanting some non-commissioned officers they were wanting some to act as guards. And so, and afterwards he I guess he thought I was a pretty good soldier. And anyway, he said, you ought to be eligible for that. I said, oh man, I want to go home. I don't want to go see those guys that caused the war. But anyway, they announced that this was only going to be a short trial, like 60, 90 days. That's what they thought. And I said, well, he said, well, it's only going to be about 60 days. It would be an interesting experience. You like history, and somehow he knew I liked history. So, well, I thought about that. And can't go home for a while anyway, because I don't have enough time. Anyway, he recommended me. I applied, and I was selected to be a sergeant of the guard at the Nuremberg War Crimes Trials. And I stayed there for about 11 months. It was not a 30-day trial. I wrote in a book about it, Sergeant of the Guard at Nuremberg.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. I thought of these guys as enemies. And they were. When I was in basic training, they taught you to think that way. You were ready to go kill them. So the first, I'll try to keep this short, but they just brought it in there initially to be oriented. These guys are enemies, and treat them as prisoners of war, but treat them humanely, And, first thing, they took us on an orientation. And they took us to, all over the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, where the trial was held. The big complex. Wasn't too much damaged by the war. The rest of Nuremberg was just level. 5,000 people still under the rubble where we bombed them, they're buried under there. There was nobody, all the men were off to the war. It was the work of the women and children to clear things, and they didn't even have a shovel. They couldn't have trucks to haul that rubble away. But anyway, they took us in there to orient us on where everything was, where the prisoners were, where the jail cells were, where the courtroom was. And we went to the exercise area. There were 22 Nazis, Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess. And they were out exercising. They were walking around this area, 3 or 4 times as big as this. And yeah, I looked at those guys, I thought of them as criminals or gangsters or whatever, because that's what I'd been taught. They didn't look like gangsters or criminals. They were walking around that exercise room, and I looked at them real good, and I thought, my God, these guys look like they could be somebody walking back home in my park in White City, Kansas. And so they were being accused of a lot of stuff. We had to, But anyway, I was there 7.5 months. They said the trial would last 30 days. It was a 4-power international trial, Russia, Great Britain, France, and the United States. And we were constantly arguing with the Russians. They were hurt by the war. They lost 25 million people. We lost 400 and some thousand. And they were more hateful. They just wanted to take them all out and shoot them instead of... Stalin said if we'd get rid of 50,000 army officers, we'd get rid of the bulk of the intelligence of the Germans, and we wouldn't have any more wars. We didn't do it. We had a trial. So 11 of them were hung. 4 got 20 years. Excuse me. 3 got Well, 3 got released. No charges. I think that's about it. I don't remember what the rest were, but anyway, 11 of them got hung right there. Herman Goring, he outfoxed us. He killed himself, took cyanide pills. The rest of them got hung or got their sentence. Most of them, after our military government left Germany and turned it over to the Germans, they had control and they released these people because they were fighting for Germany, just like I was. I wonder if we'd lost the war if they'd been prosecuting me and all our other leaders. That's, I mean, I wrote a book about Nuremberg. I guess I mentioned that. So, but it was an interesting experience, to say the least, because I got well acquainted with those people and some of their family. They all had kids. The leader of the Navy submarines, his what was his name? Admiral somebody. He's a famous name. He had 2 sons, and of course their dad being commander of the submarines. They joined the submarines, and his 2 sons both were killed in the German submarines. I suppose we killed them maybe going over to La Havre, I don't know. But anyway, tough war. We've had 6 wars since World War II, and we haven't won any of them, and didn't reconcile the problems that were involved. Now, we're talking about bombing the hell out of somebody if they don't comply with what we want to do. I don't care who leads the other countries. It's their choice. It's not mine or yours. I don't think. Maybe it is. Some of us seem to think so anyway. But we're not here to talk politics, so we better go on and finish winning the war.
Yeah, can we talk more about like checking the jail cells and stuff, or like weapons or cyanide pills?
Yeah. We'd love for you to dive in more detail about what you were talking about at the end. So, like the cyanide pill and checking the cells and things like that.
Well, I was a sergeant of the guard. I didn't do much. I stood at one end of the cell block, the jail, and another sergeant of the guard down there. And the responsibility of each guard was to keep their eyes constantly. We were afraid they were going to commit suicide. We didn't know how they might do it or anything else. Herman Goring did. That was a disaster, public relations-wise. Let's see, what was the other?
How did he get a cyanide? Was it?
Oh, well, that was kind of a love triangle with a German Fräulein. What happened? His name was, I knew him, he was there. He's from Hesperia, California. And his first name is Julius, but I can't take his last name right now. Anyway, he was about my age. And about 5 years ago, this hasn't been publicized, and the Army doesn't agree with me on it, but this is what happened. He had a German Fräulein named Mona, and she found out that he was a guard. You know, we wear white helmets and white, and she had friends who were friends of Herman Goring. And Herman told them that the Americans were not providing him medication for his illness, cold, bronchial, or something. I want to know if he would take him some medicine. Well, yeah. So they did a time or two. third time, they took we had ballpoint pens and bigger than that, but you put a big ink capsule in there. The third time, he took cyanide pills. It was about time to hang Herman and 10 others. The night, it was supposed to be midnight on like September or October, that they were to go to the gallows. He was going to be the first one to be hung. And they announced that to everybody. Well, about 15 minutes before, I was home in college then. I didn't think the trial was ever going to end. But I talked to him and others. But anyway, about the time he was going to go to the cell block, he took the pills. First thing you know, the guards called the sergeant of the guard. He called the medical officer. By the time they got anything done, Herman was dead. Most embarrassing situation that the United States had, I think, during the whole war. We had all these guards guarding Herman, and he committed suicide, and our army officers are, going to get revenge and get rid of all these guys. So it was really, well, they the army, they did an investigation. And Herman, they said, they didn't even talk to the guards, but they said after a thorough investigation, Herman had secreted these capsules in his body cavities. He'd had them there for all these months. Anyway, that's not what happened. I'm not going to argue with the army. Anyway, that's the rest of the story, I guess.
Yeah. Could we go back and touch this on the Battle of the Bulge a little?
Yeah, well, the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah.
The thing that I remember that is not only the gruesome things that happened in combat, but how cold it was. I mean, I was a farm kid. I grew up on the farm, did chores, and but I've never been in a situation where you're in a foxhole, you understand, down in the ground, and there's no cooler place in the world than a foxhole 3 feet down in the ground. But 2 people cramped in there, one on guard constantly. The other has to be in a kind of a fetal position and have your rifle and try to keep warm with one blanket. And we don't have what you need. But anyway, I lived through it. And when I went up there with 11 guys, I guess, and replacements. And I didn't know, I knew all of them, but I didn't know where they went on the front lines. But I heard, you pass the word by the grapevine, the guys you do who knew who they were. And there was only 5 of us got out of there alive, and a couple of them were in bad shape. Hit, one of them got hit. Machine gun bullets just right across here, and he still lived. Patched him up. That's about it. I think. I got home, went to K-State, and become a computer programmer and systems analyst, and a manager of systems over Manhattan. I got a degree from K-State and worked at Kansas Farm Bureau over there. Rest of the story.
That's it. Wow. Thank you.
Do I get a copy of this?
You will. Get a
Good.
copy.
Okay.
Yep.
Good.
You are
Well, that's
hired.
good. I guess I better not move here.